Hello and welcome to the âmusiciansâ. My name is Spencer Burke, your host for ThinkFwd. In this week's episode, I get together with my friend Andy Crouch, and we talk about music and theology. It was an interesting conversation. I think it might be a great conversation starter for a small group or a staff, or even in your own personal reflection. I encourage you to head over to the âmusiciansâ and download small group questions or even personal reflection questions. This is our 6th episode, and I hope that if you've been enjoying this, that you might pass it on to a friend. Let them know to head on over to the âmusiciansâ. You know, over the years we've had some fun conversations, and I remember one time when you came down to the house, we went out on the pier and had some lunch.
Which was awesome.
Wasn't that fun? Yeah. Well, you threw out an analogy that I just think captured that moment, and I think has captured our relationship over many years too, and that was the idea of you being a little bit more from a classical point of view, you know, even if we use music as the metaphor. Yeah. And I might be a little bit more jazz, a little bit more, you know, and so, yeah, well, play with that a little bit.
You're free jazz. You're like Ornette Coleman.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so some people say, wait, we got to be this or that or structure. I mean, play with that a little bit, yeah.
It's actually an amazing metaphor for theology, I think. Mm-hmm. You know, jazz, what happens in jazz is that there's a standard, right? All of jazz is actually built on this repertoire of standards that were these popular songs from the 20s, 30s, 40s. And what jazz musicians do is they take the basic tune, the chord progression, and then they start to improvise on it and explore all of the sort of ramifications of it. And it's really, you know, people think, oh, jazz is improvisation, and of course it is, but it's improvisation on the basis of a tradition. And then there becomes a tradition within jazz as to who you're echoing and who you're playing with, so that it is improvisational and it is innovative. And sometimes, you know, to people who have more classically tuned mind, it may even sound a little dissonant or ugly, right?
Sure.
But in fact, it's all relating to this tradition, and it's generated by and responding to the tradition. Now, the interesting thing about classical music is that we think of classical music as being this very fixed form, and the musician only plays what was written, which is historically and even in our contemporary time, it's not right. So historically, classical music used to have lots of improvisation involved. Much of classical music was improvised. Bach used to just sit down and improvise stuff, and every once in a while he'd write it down. Well, until about the 19th century, musicians were always improvisers. But then the tradition got kind of fixed or fixated, you might say. And it became just about the repetition of something that someone originally improvised. Well, even that's not really true. Because when I was a classical musician, now I play gospel too, so I sort of move between jazz and the tradition. But when I play Bach, I have notes on a page, but if I just mechanically played the notes, it wouldn't be music. I have to bring interpretation to it. So I, as a classical musician, can't say, oh no, we just need to stick with the repertoire and not improvise, because every time I play, I have to interpret. And you, as a jazz musician, can't say, hey man, let's just improvise, you know, let's just be cool cats, right? No, we have to learn the standards, we have to learn our instruments. There's all these disciplines that go into it, and the truth is that both of our music is enriched when we realize it's both a response tradition and an improvisation.
Right. Well, think of the traditional person who flips the channels on the radio, like, oh, I'll only listen to classical, or oh, I'll only listen to... So the jazz person thinks the classical is boring, the classical person thinks it's chaotic, whatever. And so in some ways, people would look at you and I and say, wait a minute, you know, well, how can you even speak to each other? Why you seem so opposed? Or what, you know? And it's not, in a sense, we have that ability to play and kind of work together. But that boggles many people's minds. Well, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd like to play some gospel for them, so they realize.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not. I love improvisation, and I love it theologically. I think it's important to do it. I love the tradition, but there's nothing that stops us, because ultimately I think we're we're trying to make music.
Yeah.
Theology has a lot of musical qualities, and one of them is that whatever kind of music you play, it's in the service of this more remarkable, mysterious, beautiful thing that you only get little glimpses of. And that's really true no matter what genre of music you play.
Right.
So yeah, I think we are enriched by these kinds of dialogues.
And maybe even the influence, I mean, how does the next music come, or how does the next genre come?
And in fact, what's happening in classical music now is young classical musicians are being trained to improvise for the first time in about 150 years. And that needs to happen for classical evangelical theology as well. It doesn't mean we stop playing, the Bach, or holding to our, if you're Reformed, to the Confession of Faith.
Right.
But it means that we have to learn how to, in real time and in community, because improvisation happens in community, actually discover new resonances in our theology that we didn't realize were there.
But what happens when you start to get in touch with feelings, not just playing the music, but actually engaging the music? As you were talking about, it's not reading the notes, but so often we've been taught we only read the notes. So in a sense, maybe when a jazz player, I'm just personalizing it with us, I come in, it looks, but as a classical player, they start to feel some emotions they've never felt before.
Sure.
I mean, how do we work with some of that? And, and where does that lead us sometimes? I mean, there can be, it's not that all rules are out, but we're engaging on multiple levels.
Right. Well, and I might distinguish between, I think theology, specifically theology, is partly about sorting out what the rules are that make sense of kind of the music of our faith.
Yeah.
And we might end up with real disagreements about that.
Yeah.
But that's different from music, right? Like, music theory is not music. So we might end up not fully agreeing about kind of the theory.
Sure.
But what the theory is all about is, what do we make of this music, which is faith? Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, Spencer, we'd have to talk a lot more before we even sort it out. Like, do we agree on the theory? I don't even know.
Yeah.
But do we agree on the stories that animate us, on the mystery and the beauty and the terror of the world that prompts a response from us? And can we play together with that? Yes, absolutely we can.
And almost moving away from the false dichotomies that tend to always be the places where we try to stick ourselves. And I think with your book, you do that as well. I mean, in that sense of, we've had false dichotomies. It's like either for or against. So play with that a little bit.
So, the idea of the book, Culture Making, is that we got sort of locked into some postures toward culture, condemning culture. Just, if it's cultural and Christians aren't doing it, it's bad. Then we started critiquing culture, which is, we'll analyze it, and we may even be very sophisticated in our analysis, but we're not actually participating. We're just watching what the culture does. Then some folks started, I would say, copying culture, which is seeing what the culture does and then doing it in a Christian way, right? Now I think many Christians just consume culture. And all those postures, condemning, critiquing, copying, consuming, leave us bent and sort of, it's like we've gotten bent out of shape. And the real shape of human beings with culture is to create and cultivate culture. Cultivating is just taking care of what's already there. We've got these beautiful plants. Someone takes care of these. Well, we need to do that with culture. We need to take care of it, keep it good, pass it on to the next generation, but also create. And dare to say, is there something that's not here at all right now that, because I'm a human being made in the image of a creative God, I might create and bring into the world? And this is why really none of us can afford to be just classical musicians who just play the repertoire, because the world is missing things that we were created to bring into it. We all have to be, I think, jazz musicians and do some improvising.
Well, it'll be fun to kind of just play some riffs together, whatever. And I really hope, as people kind of hear or see or think, the ability to say, maybe I don't have to be afraid, or maybe I don't have to overwhelm. And there can be that beautiful balance in beginning to engage. And then maybe it'll turn us into a whole nother genre of music as we move forward.
Absolutely, because there's more out there, right? Cool. Thanks, man.